All right. Well, thanks for having me here today, and Nick as well. We're excited to talk about headless development. We already had that great talk by Peter talking about JSS, and we're going to be talking about some of the kind of newest features that are in JSS and the Sitecore headless development. So a little bit about myself. I'm Thomas Desmond, latest and greatest JavaScript technical evangelist at Sitecore. Started back in January, so almost 3 months now. And before that, I was a full stack developer doing a lot of front end work. So really excited to kind of make this transition from a full-time developer role to this JavaScript technical evangelist role and becoming the developer advocate for front end development here at Sitecore. I'm located in San Diego, California, so pretty far away, but it's really nice to be able to come to some of these virtual talks and just kind of present to everyone around the world and meet everyone that's part of the Sitecore community. If you're interested in reaching out to me after this, LinkedIn is a great place. You can find me on Twitter, Thomas J. Desmond, or you can find more information about me on my blog, thetombomb.com. And I'd like Nick to introduce himself as well.
Hey y'all, I'm Nick Wesselman. I'm a product manager for developer experience at Sitecore. So in addition to JSS and ASP.NET Core SDKs, this also includes the Sitecore CLI and the Sitecore Docker tools. I guess it's been over 12 years now working with Sitecore. How that flies. And you can find me on Twitter, and I'm kind of ever present on Sitecore community Slack as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we want to cover today is Next.js in JSS, some of the new features of that, covering Jamstack as well, the benefits of Next.js, why we chose it, and at the end, Nick is going to be giving a demo of using Next.js with JSS. So a little bit of knowledge just up front, the Headless Rendering Suite. If you're not familiar with it, it's that toolkit for offering multiple ways of delivering headless implementations with Sitecore. So we got that nice talk today about using JSS with JavaScript applications. There's also an ASP.NET package as well, and then the headless module, which is kind of the overarching package. So all of these make up the Headless Rendering Suite, which allow you to do that headless implementations with Sitecore. The 16.0 release came out late February. And that is, as part of Sitecore 10.1, we have this in conjunction with that is the 16.0 release of this headless rendering suite. So what's the nice big thing inside of 16.0? Well, it's the Next.js support. We added support for Next.js. So it still includes that Angular, React, and Vue support that we've had before, and we're adding on Next.js. So there is the new NPM package, Sitecore GSS for Next.js, and a new sample app showing off Next.js with JSS. So same support for Angular, React, and Vue, and we're adding in Next.js support. So continuing support for the existing features that you're used to inside of JSS with Sitecore. So developer workflows, both in that connected and disconnected model, tracking analytics and personalization. And this is with server-side rendering. That's what SSR stands for. I'm going to talk a whole lot about the different rendering options inside of Next.js, but right now the analytics and personalization are only within server-side rendering. And you get the inline content editing and preview with the experience editor that you're used to as well. Some more of the features inside of the SDK include starter templates, help you get up and running quickly with Next.js. The placeholder rendering, field helpers as well, Sitecore-driven routes and layouts. These are all, shouldn't be new features necessarily, but they are new features. They're features with Next.js. These aren't necessarily new features in JSS itself. Component level data fetching. What you see is what you get editing experience in Experience Editor, so that really easy editing experience of directly being able to go into Experience Editor and make changes. And that analytics support and personalization support inside of server-side rendering. It also simplifies the JSS development. There's a lot of features built into Next.js, just has a lot of out-of-the-box features built on top of React that it provides for you. So it's got this built-in production, built-in server for production pre-rendering. So there's no need for the headless server-side rendering proxy for production deployment. Break? I guess so. Why are you not clicking? There we go.
Till now,
so
it sounds like fairy tale for developers.
Yeah, Next.js has built-in preview mode for editor integration. So the Next.js team has put in this thing called preview mode, and it's meant to be put together with other CMSs so that you can preview the content that is from your CMSs or from any other location that you're pulling in content from. So this preview mode is really a great way to be able to kind of see what it'll look like pulling in your data from maybe the Sitecore CM. And last, there is container-based options available. So if you want to be using containers with Next.js, we have those options available to you to be able to get started in containers. Why did we choose Next.js? There are, as you saw in kind of previous slides from the presentation, there are numerous front-end frameworks, front-end libraries. There's a new one every single day. So why did we choose Next.js? And really the reason for that was the need for speed. We wanted everyone to be able to have faster implementations, faster deliveries, and we found that this was going to be possible with Next.js. And really the big reason that this is able to improve on speed is that Next.js is built with Jamstack in mind. So Jamstack is this architecture of combining JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And I want to reiterate that this is just an architecture. These aren't new technologies. JavaScript, APIs, and markup, these aren't new. But when you combine these in a particular way, you are focusing on this Jamstack architecture, and you're able to create fast deliverable websites. So JavaScript gives us the dynamic front-end functionality. APIs are how we're going to be connecting to any of our third-party services, authentication, databases, anything that we need to get from a third-party service. And markup is the how we're going to create our HTML files. So we actually will be using maybe Markdown and using a static site generator, such as Next.js, that Markdown gets converted into HTML. So again, it's not a new tech stack, it's an architectural approach. And when you do Jamstack correctly, these anchors of pre-rendering, fast delivery, and rehydration are possible. So pre-rendering is this idea that we're actually going to do static site generation, where our pages and files are generated at build time instead of at request time. So at build time, we're building our static content. That static content is able to be delivered to the edge on a CDN for fast delivery. So we're not having to rely on a server to handle the request. We can just deliver that content directly to our users because we've already rendered it at build time. And then using rehydration on the front end, we can get dynamic content and do rehydration of the content if we need to on the front end. So Jamstack is this approach of really doing static site generation, doing that generation of your content at build time, so you can have this fast delivery to the edge on a CDN. And Next.js is built with Jamstack in mind and is capable of doing static site generation. So a little bit more on the advantages of Next.js. It is built on top of React. So it is a React framework for production is kind of how it's marketed. And so if you're going to be using Next.js, you're dependent on React. You're going to be using React technologies. So you have a lot of the power of React, and then you have these out-of-the-box features and more features built in with Next.js. One way that I've heard it described is Next.js or React is the engine for your car, and then Next.js is the car built around that engine. It's a sports car. It's got all the upgrades. It's got all the features you want. It's a fast car built around the React engine. So it provides you with that static site generation, server-side rendering, and even a hybrid approach where you can do static site generation on some pages, server-side rendering on other pages, and doing incremental regeneration to update your pages as needed. So some of the other features that are just built into Next.js, some of these out-of-the-box features, again, I really want to reiterate that flexible delivery model provides server-side rendering, the traditional approach where your server handles each request, does static site generation where you're doing that pre-building of your content during build time, and then also incremental static regeneration where you're revalidating and regathering the static content at different intervals on the front end. Has internationalization support. It's used by some major enterprise companies such as Netflix and Hulu. So these huge brands with tons of traffic are using Next.js and able to support their enterprise models. It simplifies that JSS implementation, like I mentioned before, the out-of-the-box server script bundling, a lot more support, just less code being needed to get you up and running. Out-of-the-box TypeScript support, image optimization. This one's actually really cool. I was using it the other day of being able to just automatically optimize your images, doing lazy loading, viewport scaling. So it really helps you in getting the, because images generally, especially in these static sites, are some of your biggest content possibly. So being able to optimize images really can speed up performance. Has error handling, component level CSS, easier debugging. Really, Next.js is built on top of React to give you lots of out-of-the-box features to give you an amazing experience where you can get up and running quickly with Next.js. It's got the power of React, but then a whole lot of features built on top of it that really get you going with Next.js quickly. I really want to reiterate this again, is this static site generation and Jamstack. This SSG, it might be referred to, SSG versus SSR, that static site generation versus server-side rendering. Static site generation is the idea of reducing or eliminating processing of your app rendering time when the user interacts with the page. So instead of trying to render your page when the user visits your site, you have that pre-rendered content that was rendered during build time already. So your build times might be extended because you're generating that content, but you generate that content once, and then serve it directly to your users on the edge, on a CDN, and have the static content delivered very quickly out to your users. It might seem a little confusing how this works, but Next.js has made it really simple with these 3 unique methods. So these are methods unique to Next.js. There's the left-hand side get server-side props and the right-hand side for static site generation. So any given page can be doing server-side rendering or static site generation. So if you see the right-hand side methods in your page, that means you're going to be doing static site generation. Next.js knows to generate that page during build time. If it sees the method on the left, get server-side props, it knows it's going to be doing server-side rendering, and it's going to be getting that content when the user requests it with each request. So if you have highly dynamic content, you can do the server-side rendering. If you have a lot of static content on the page, the static site generation methods on the right are what you're going to want to use to perform that static site generation and building your pages at build time. Yes, it's in JSS 16.0. We're really excited to see what people build out with it. It supports Jamstack, so you get that pre-rendering, fast delivery, and then rehydration on the front end if you have any of that dynamic content that you need to show off to your users. Supports static site generation and server-side rendering. I'm really excited to see what people do with the static site generation with Next.js. If you want extremely performant sites that are able to just be delivered almost like instantly to your users on the edge, static site generation is a really great place to be. And when you're using Next.js. So again, I'm Thomas Desmond, pretty new here at Sitecore, but excited to be your front-end developer advocate. I encourage you to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, check out my blog, but really excited to be in the Sitecore community. I've given a couple of these presentations. It's always been great, a lot of fun, and I'm happy to be here. But with that, I'd like to pass it off to Nick to start giving the demo with Next.js.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas. As you can tell, we are very excited about Next.js and what it brings to JSS development, in particular, just how much more streamlined it makes it. You're less focused on boilerplate and Webpack and all that, and you can focus basically on just creating your components. Along those lines, this isn't normally part of the demo, but since Peter mentioned it, I've become a big fan of Storybook. And the Helix examples that we are currently on the develop branch include a Next.js implementation that does use Storybook. And what's great about Storybook is that it basically allows your front-end developers, without connecting to Sitecore, to mock out all the components that you are looking to build, and in different content states, or even you're able to mock the state of your components, say when they're in editing mode, by mocking some of that Sitecore context. So in a way, I kind of think of it like unit tests for your front end. In fact, some people use Storybook that way. So anyway, I wanted to just show that quickly before we dive in. So let's talk about just how you can get started with Next.js. So this will be some just a quick demo of the ways you can get started, and then what it's like to create a component. So if you are in a non-Windows environment, or you just want to use the mock Sitecore service, what we call disconnected mode, you can do that with the Sitecore CLI. And so the first thing you need to do is actually install the Sitecore CLI. So you'll obviously want to make sure you have the latest LTS version of Node installed. And then we have with Node, you can install global commands with npm install -g. And this will basically just try to update mine since I already have it installed. And there we go. Now I have the JSS CLI available, so I can do JSS. And we can see that if I'm not in the context of a JSS app, the command we have available is JSS create. And so we can do JSS create. We'll call this our Sitecore user group app, and we want to use the Next.js sample. As Peter mentioned, there are additional arguments you can pass on to JSS create. So if you need, say, previous versions of JSS, you can do that through the -b command or branch command. With the next release of this Next.js example as well, there will be some additional options for things like using SSR or SSG by default. So it's actually going to pull down the example direct from our GitHub and do an npm install. Npm install can take a moment, so while it's doing that, I'm going to point out that both of these options that we're covering today are documented on jss.sitecore.com. We have the walkthrough on using this JSS CLI and JSS create, as well as our example we'll do next, which uses the container-based starter. Lots of other great documentation out here on everything from the architecture of our experience editor integration to how JSS routes pages with Next.js, and then getting into details on internationalization, data fetching, and so on. Also, some more details on how if you've done JSS development in the past, there's some details on how Next.js is going to be different. All right, looks like we're almost done over here. There we go. So I can just go ahead and do a JSS start here. That would start up JSS in disconnected or mock mode. Let's take a quick look at the solution first. Oh, actually, let me go into there and then launch code. There we go. So if you've done Next.js development, it should be a pretty familiar looking architecture or solution architecture. In Next.js, the pages folder is pretty key because this determines your routes that are available. And for Sitecore, as you might imagine, we kind of want to catch any route, any path, and so that's what this slug does here. This token does for Next.js. Basically, if there's not a more specific route, then this would catch any path, and you can use that in sort of subpaths too. And so in here, we declare a React component, which represents our page. And it's going to be passed in layout data, and it will sort of instantiate the initial layout or structure of that React page, React-based page or route. But here we can see this function that Thomas talked about, get static paths. This is going to tell Next for this route what are all the available URLs basically, and we provide a service for that, a JavaScript library or service you can call that will do a GraphQL fetch against your Sitecore instance to determine all the available pages in the site. And then we have get static props, which actually gets the data for that for an individual route. And as part of the boilerplate here, there's what we call the page props factory. And the page props factory is going to do its main job, which is actually fetching the layout data for the page. If you haven't done JSS development before, the layout service basically gives you a JSON structure of all the components on the page and their data and what placeholders they go in. We do some additional data fetching here too to get a dictionary, and we have something called the component prop service that allows us to do component level data fetching, something that's not usually possible in Next.js, but because JSS knows all the components that are going to be on the page, we can go through them and say, hey, do any of you want us to fetch some additional data? So we actually allow you to declare get static props and get server-side props at the component level as well. So let's go ahead and do a JSS start. And again, this is going to launch basically a mock Sitecore service, a mock layout service, in addition to the app itself. And you can see that data here, where we actually have a YAML format that declares placeholders and the components within them and their data. This is great for getting started, and especially for the initial implementation or initial import of an application. But you can hit some limitations of this code-first approach pretty quickly. And so we do typically recommend that you move to a Sitecore-first approach where you're just creating components and content directly in a Sitecore instance. And here we go. I have my Next.js style guide. If you haven't done JSS before, each of the samples includes what we call the style guide, which shows you some common patterns and how you output different types of Sitecore fields, and then other implementation patterns. So that is the sort of code first, starting with JSS create. If you are a Windows-based developer, if you want a full Sitecore environment, if you want to get a Visual Studio solution that allows you to also deploy code and configuration into that Sitecore instance, we have a container-based starter as well. And somewhat unintuitively, it uses .NET New templates. If you've used our ASP.NET Core starter before, you might understand why. It's because for ASP.NET Core, we already had this Sitecore ASP.NET Getting Started solution. And so it made sense for us to build on that and create one for Next.js as well. So it's a bit of a long command, but it's in our documentation, since you need to point this .NET New, the .NET CLI at our NuGet server. So, but once you've installed the template, you can simply do .NET New Sitecore Next.js Getting Started, and give it a name. And this will actually create a full containerized environment. I say, yes, I do want you to do restore of any .NET local tools. And then it's going to ask me whether I want to run this script, create JSS project, and I'll say yes. And behind the scenes, this is actually going to invoke the same JSS CLI that we just did. So it will grab the latest compatible template or starter for JSS and add that to the solution as well. Instead of waiting for that and waiting for containers to start, let's jump over to one that I have spun up already and have running. So we have a XP0 environment that also includes a containerized Next.js application. And this solution in here, the rendering should look pretty similar to what we just looked at as far as the Next.js app. And then under platform, though, we have a Visual Studio project that can deploy to the Sitecore environment if, say, we wanted to customize the layout service output with a C# class or add some Sitecore configurations. We also have serialized items. So this starter is also set up to work Sitecore-first and includes configurations for the Sitecore CLI to, on first run, serialize things like your renderings and templates for you automatically. And then again, you have the Docker environment with Docker files set up to install Sitecore modules like the management services needed for the CLI, and to install the Headless services module for you as well as layer in any anything from the Visual Studio solution. So great stuff there. So we can also see it running here already. Again, we have the style guide and things are imported for us in the content tree. So let's try adding a new component to this. Let me clean up some VS Code instances here. And to create this, first I'm going to go into the rendering, the Next.js part of my solution here. And I'm going to use the command JSS scaffold. And this will scaffold out a new component for me. And I can see that under source components, where it's created a new sub-demo component for me. And this looks like a pretty straightforward React component. We do have some prettier errors here. There's an open issue where we create things with the wrong line endings when we scaffold. Easy enough to fix in VS Code. And so this component, we do use TypeScript by default, which avoids some of the JavaScript fun that Peter talked about and gives us, we think, a much smoother approach to JSS development, strongly typed, and so on. So here, part of using TypeScript with React means we need to declare the props, the data that's going into the component, and what its type is. We see here that by default it's expecting a heading. So let's go into Sitecore and start creating this component there in what we would call a Sitecore-first approach. So, and some of this is going to look pretty familiar if you've done other Sitecore development. So let's first create our template, sub-demo. And this is going to be our data source template. And it was already expecting heading, so let's go ahead and just use that for convenience. And let's add an image and a link. As a general link. And then, again, the standard Sitecore page editor, or I'm sorry, I'm dating myself, experience editor development. And create a rendering as well. But in this case, rather than creating a view rendering or component or controller rendering or XSL rendering, we're going to create a JSON rendering. This is what the primary way that you use the layout service to basically just output some JSON instead of a fully rendered component. And we'll call this one sub-demo as well. do some standard rendering configuration. So in this solution, we use page components for our data source path. And we'll select our template. And if we see here for JSS development, we get some additional fields as well that we could populate if we wanted. Instead of just serializing a data source item, we could actually define a GraphQL query that we want to execute for the data of this component. You can also select or create what we call a rendering contents resolver, which is a way of doing the same thing, but with C# code. It's also important with JSS development that if your component has child placeholders, you actually need to explicitly configure that so the layout service can serialize them. And ultimately, this is going to result in an output that looks something like this. And this is the layout service output where we can see the fields on the page or route, as well as the placeholders, the components within the placeholders within the components, and so on, and down and down. So then our JSS SDK is then responsible for transforming this into or mapping these to their React implementations. So let's do one last step here and add this component to our available, to our main placeholder as an allowed rendering. And so now if we pop open the experience editor for our home page, we should be able to add our component. And of course, bear with me as the experience editor is warmed up, but is still going to take a moment. Oh, that was faster than I expected. Great. We are looking to add Horizon support for Next.js and ASP.NET Core in an upcoming release. And I can tell you from the little work that I've done with it that Horizon as a developer is much more joyful to work with because of how fast it is. So I added that component and it looks like it's already rendering for me. And so how is that possible? All I did was create it in my JSS app over here. And yet somehow my Next.js app running in the container already has my implementation available. And so if I jump back to my Windows terminal here and I look at the logs for that Next.js container, we can see that it's actually watching as I'm developing and recompiling for me. So not only that, but if, let's say, I now go back to my editor and I want to say change this to a H2, you can see it compile, and over in my browser it's refreshing in real time. This Next.js fast refresh is a really nice feature for developers, and I think really adds to the efficiency of JSS-based development. So, but we're missing some fields here, so let's go ahead and add those to our component. Get rid of that that hard-coded text there. So we had an image, which is an image field. And thank you, VS Code, for automatically importing these for me. So we have those, and then I'm going to want to render those as well. So let's make sure we have the image and link available. So let's make this guy a little more error resistant too, in case this isn't populated. Add our image. And we can add the link as well.
Nick, I want just
Yes.
to remind, we have somehow like 5 minutes. How far you are?
Perfect. We're right on. I might even come in a little bit
And
before
just,
that.
yeah, to save some time for questions as
Yep.
well.
Thank you. So it's here now. Again, we've refreshed automatically here, and we can populate these additional fields if we like. It looks like it was clicking through my link. And of course, for our image, we want to select that OG JSS logo. And for a link, we can link to our style guide. And why don't we go ahead and do a publish. And actually, I'm going to jump back and make sure all our templates and everything get published, so we can see it on the site front end. All right. And there we go. Hello world, linking to our style guide. And you might have noticed that even within that author-defined link that we are doing client-side routing. It's one of the nice features of Next.js, and Next.js will even do some prefetching. But let's say I'm not done yet. I want to make some changes. Actually, I don't want that to be an H2. I want that to be an H5. And I'd like there to be a marquee around it because I'm awful. And there we go. Automatically refreshing for us. And I think even refreshing over in the experience editor. So that's just a quick demo of basic developer experience with Next.js. Keep an eye out for some future user group meetings on this little tour that Thomas and I are doing, and hoping to expand from here and maybe show both some differences between SSR and SSG with Next.js, and potentially show some deployment to Vercel, the creators of Next.js, who we are currently talking partnership with. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you all.
Thank you very much.
Just a feedback. It's great. Yeah, I have a feedback as a no background of developer now. I'm more manager, but if I started to work with Sitecore in 2004, where it was version 4, most of the people online doesn't even see this, but yeah, it's great how you progress.
Thank you.
It's simply great. Thank you for the demo.
No problem.
Thank you very much. And we have some questions. Do you want me to read them in the chat? There are some questions.
Sure.
Yes. So Grant is asking, any plans to support Next.js for Vue.js?
It's
my question. Sorry.
We're getting asked a bit about that. We're paying attention to customer demand. We definitely see how Vue is growing in popularity in the wider JavaScript community. At the same time, I think we need to, we have no plans to drop existing Next or Angular support in JSS. We have to be picky about what we do support, because what we do, we want to do well. So, and the more frameworks we add, the more, I guess, the more we kind of stretch ourselves. So I guess I would also say that we're looking, one of the things I want to do is to basically publish a spec for Sitecore Headless SDKs, so that it's easier for the community if you wanted to, say, implement Next or implement Svelte or Ember or Scully or whatever framework of the day, and have a specific checklist of the things that that these SDKs need to do.
Yeah, that's true. It's not always easy to support everything. everyone wants everything. Yeah, we know.
Especially in the JavaScript community.
Oh, come on, yeah. Yeah, I worked personally with JavaScript, how it's developed. Yeah, I don't know everything at all. Yeah, it's true.
Okay, thank you. We've got another one. Any advice on template fields names so they are user-friendly to editors and front-end developers from Inters?
It's a great question. I'll jump back into the share here and take a look at my template I created. So obviously these are names I've created are kind of optimized for their output so that they're sort of more JavaScript friendly. But if I look at content for this, yeah, this isn't very author friendly. So I'd say with JSS in particular, it's important to use Sitecore's ability to override this for authors. So if I jump down to, I need to turn on my standard fields. And I go to appearance. Or I'm sorry, maybe I missed this already. Title. That's weird. Why is that standard values? Okay. So change that to heading, and now I have something more author-friendly heading. So, and you can obviously get as descriptive as you need to in that case. So I can do there we go. So I'd say that that's an important best practice with JSS for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. We see applause in the chat for you. Sorry, we cannot have it loud, but yes, they are. Any other question?